I got a somewhat related question that deals with the war in Iraq, and I wrote this down because I want to get it right. Early in the campaign, you made a statement that I chalked up to campaign fatigue, but I'm going to quote it back to you. You said, and this was over in Dover, if the most important thing to any of you is choosing someone who did not cast that vote, talking about authorizing President Bush to go to war, or has said his vote was a mistake, then there are others to choose from. Now, I won't ask you who those others might be that we might want to choose from, because obviously that's... was it not a mistake for you and for the others to give him that authority in retrospect?
Well, in retrospect, I never would have given him the authority. You know, if we had known how he would have misused the authority, I certainly wouldn't have voted for him.
Yeah, but you lived through the Gulf of Tonkin and some of these other things. You knew there was a... I mean, this thing was called Joint Resolution to Authorize the Use of United States Armed Forces Against Iraq.
Right.
It was pretty blunt.
Well, but I can only tell you what I believed and did at the time, which was that I believe in what, you know, the sort of academics call coercive diplomacy. You know, that you're at your strongest when you are trying to get something done and people know that you could use force, but that's not the first resort. That's way in the back. And what President Bush said, and what certainly others in his administration said, who we did have, I think, some reason to give more credibility to, like Colin Powell and others.
The ones that have left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but that's my point, though, is that they all said, look, Saddam Hussein has never done anything he wasn't forced to do. We have been trying to put sanctions on him since the end of the first Gulf War. The United States has been flying protective cover over the Kurds and also trying to understand what Saddam is up to. He threw out inspectors in '98, and the British and the Americans bombed every site we knew of, but we have no intelligence as to whether we were successful or not, because there was no doubt that he had a lot of stuff. We got a lot of it, but he stopped the inspectors on their last go-around. And I guess it depends upon how you looked at the facts that most people believe to be the case. I mean, even people who voted against that authorization said at the time, we believe he has, you know, stores of WMD, but we're not ready to vote for this.
Do you doubt his honesty today?
Oh, President Bush?
Yeah, on this issue. Because now we know that they were talking about invading Iraq in February of that year.
I believe that if we focus just on President Bush, that he believed that Saddam was a threat, and that it was a threat that had not been adequately dealt with, and that 9/11 gave him the opportunity to go after what he considered to be an ongoing threat. I believe, too, that many people shared a concern about Saddam after 9/11 for reasons having to do with his megalomania, that he was someone who would not want to stand idly by and see bin Laden become the, you know, the leader, so to speak, of the anti-American world opinion. And because he had effectively stifled opposition so that it was difficult to get much good information, everyone relied on what they could, and the Bush administration undoubtedly gilded the lily of everything that came across their desk. When I was trying to make up my mind, I was not trusting George Bush. I was listening to others within his administration who I thought I had reason to at least believe were credible. People in my husband's administration, Tony Blair, who I did not at the time know was 100% aligned with Bush, almost regardless of the evidence. I'd had a good relationship with him going back years. And also, remember what, you know, Bush and others said in the lead up to that vote, which was, this is the best way to avoid having to take action against Saddam because we will put inspectors back in. At the time, if you go back and read what I said this is not a vote for preemption. This is a vote to put inspectors back in to work with the United Nations. And for a few months, they gave the impression that they were doing that. The inspectors went back in. Unfortunately, we now know they didn't have any intention of letting the inspectors do what should have been done. We could have effectively, I believe, constrained Saddam by putting inspectors in. If you were really worried about him doing something unpredictable, like invading Kuwait or doing whatever he might have done, he was in a box. He was put back into a box. And that's why, you know, when you talk about the specific vote, there are reasons in the hands of a different administration why it would have made sense. Obviously, now we know that they were not intending to do what would have been sensible. So the real question is, what do we do now? We're down this road. We've invested all this money. We've wasted, you know, so much time and effort and lost all these brave young men and women.
Well, and we've made a national commitment. This is where I was going with this. Is we've made the commitment. The president did it, like it or not.
Right.
Congress gave him the authority,
right,
like it or not. And now, how can we just say, well, now we'll go home?
Well, I think we've got to be careful about how we do that, which is what I've tried to be in this campaign, to say, look, the American military has done everything they were asked to do. They were asked to get rid of Saddam, and they did it. They were asked to give the Iraqis free and fair elections, and they did that. And then they were asked to give this Iraqi government the chance to do what only the Iraqis can do for themselves. But it is abundantly clear to anyone who looks at this objectively that there is no military solution. You may still, with American troops, be able to get tactical gains, but that is not a solution. Because the Iraqi government has failed to do what it had to do politically, and the Bush administration has failed in either convincing or requiring the Iraqis to act, and engaged in diplomacy in an effective way with the surrounding countries. So we find ourselves in this position where we can say the military has done what it should do, but that is not enough. It is not going to make a difference if we continue to have the political and diplomatic failures. And I don't think it'll make a difference if we have troops there another day, another year, another 5, or another 10 years, if these other conditions are not met. That's why I believe we should begin to withdraw our troops. And we should do it in a way that gives the Iraqis fair notice. I have said that when I'm president, we will start withdrawing them within 60 days of my becoming president. I think it will take some time for us to get prepared, because you may recall I had this big dust-up with the Pentagon last spring where I said, I want to know what you're doing to plan for withdrawal, and they accused me of being unpatriotic, which is their typical kind of pushback. And I said, wait, you know, I think it's the height of patriotism to figure out how we're going to get our troops out. So we know they're doing something, but I would doubt that they are getting to the level of operational planning that is necessary to withdraw safely the troops and the equipment, plus figure out what are we going to do with the more than 100,000 Americans who are there as either civilian employees or private contractors, and what are we going to do with those Iraqis who have sided with us, which I take as a moral responsibility. As we begin to withdraw and make it clear we're going to do that, I think that it actually provides a new opening for the Iraqis to do things they have not heretofore done. They've been given basically a blank check by the Bush administration. It's been kind of wink, wink. You know, we'll say, yeah, we should do this, but there's no consequences. When I came back from my third trip there in January, I said, we are not using sufficient leverage on the Iraqis. We basically pay for their security if you're in the Iraqi government. They don't trust anybody else. And so we give them the same contractors that we are now seeing have gotten into trouble for other purposes. Sure. So why don't we say we're not going to continue to provide them security? Let them try to live in the green zone and beyond, the way that average Iraqis have to live. Yeah. That would, I believe, focus their attention on having to do some of what I think needs to be done. So it's not going to be, there are no good options.